By 1948, much of Eastern Europe had been taken over by the communists. In May, Joseph Stalin cut the land and rail routes into the isolated city of Berlin. General Lemay was the man chosen to prevent the strangulation of the city. He was to organize a massive airlift to feed and supply Berlin.
General Lemay used to go out and fly the airplane in himself every once in a while to be sure everything was working. If it wasn't, he'd come back, he'd call his staff together and say, look, it took me half an hour to turn around in Berlin. I had to go in and I had to sign my flight plan and everything. I don't want that to happen. Next time I go in, I want to go in and unload. I want somebody to come up and hand me a flight plan that's already signed, and I don't even get out of the airplane. I'll just turn around and take it back, and we'll let the next plane get in and do the same thing.
Lemay believed that the success of the airlift had shown how air power alone could halt Soviet aggression. The Berlin crisis had also demonstrated how, as he had feared, the American military could still be surprised. Lemay returned to America to take over the newly formed Strategic Air Command, the only offensive nuclear force in the world. His task? To prevent another Pearl Harbor. At SAC headquarters in Omaha, Lemay found the command in a sorry state. Not one plane or crew was capable of fulfilling a successful mission. He called together his team from the Pacific War, including his old aide Tommy Power as SAC's deputy commander-in-chief.
Everything in this command is dedicated to placing bombs accurately on enemy industrial areas and other targets in the shortest possible time. To us, the only difference between peace and war is where we place our bombs.
Lemay decided to test SAC's crews by staging a mock bombing raid against the city of Dayton under realistic wartime conditions.
Air Force 653, Carswell Tower, roger, clear to roll.
Roger, 653, rolling. Here we go.
Well, the Dayton bombing exercise was a revelation of how unprofessional we were. We felt that we could fly a formation. We felt we could take off a heavy airplane. We could go through thunderstorms and fly a long time and get back. As far as bombing is concerned, we had bombs dropping anywhere from 35 miles to a lot of them that never reached even the general area. It was a debacle, but it was a revelation, and it started a great deal of training to not let that happen again.
Day after day, SAC ran practice bombing raids on every major U.S. city. San Francisco was bombed 600 times in 1 month. With his training program, Lemay created a highly skilled, loyal elite.
Run across the north of...
Well, he was a real man, and he was a real commander. He knew how to get 100% productivity out of his forces. He understood how to train them so they would be disciplined to the extent that they could be sent on one of these missions that was so hazardous. And at the beginning, our missions were very hazardous. My first mission, I could make target in 50 miles, and I had to bail out. I didn't have enough fuel to go any further. And but I was willing to do that. Of course, I did study Russian, and I became a black belt judo guy to enhance my survival. But, you know, it takes a lot of instilling dedication in you to do that, and Lemay was capable of doing that.
Conditions that simulate as closely as possible actual war.
When Russia exploded its first atomic bomb in August 1949, Lemay decided to take matters into his own hands. At that time, America's nuclear weapons were kept under civilian control. Now Lemay went behind the scenes to secure direct access to the bombs, if, in a crisis, he and the president were out of contact.
In the late 1940s, General Lemay made a private arrangement with the general in New Mexico who was in charge of the nuclear stockpile, which was all stored there on a base near Los Alamos where the weapons were being assembled, that if Washington was out of reach somehow, he would take command of the weapons and pick them up and load them on planes and fly away. In a sense, then, he was arranging an independent control over the nuclear stockpile, independent from the president, who was the one who constitutionally had that responsibility. Lemay's point was the war would be over the second day. Therefore, you had to be prepared as if you were already at war. All that material that was going to be built after the war began had to be built before the war began. And that, of course, feeds directly into a war mentality. It says we're already at war. And Lemay used to say to his people, we're already at war.
Lemay's war mentality led him to argue for the unlimited expansion of SAC. He went to Congress to claim a bomber gap was developing, that SAC was being outnumbered by the Soviets.
I have already brought out that the Soviets will have a numerical advantage in long-range bombers during the time period.
By taking the most extreme estimates of Soviet bomber production, Lemay painted a grim picture of the Soviets forging ahead.
Then we will be inferior in striking power to the Soviet long-range Air Force by 1958 and 1960.
Lemay was given the weapons to destroy the whole communist bloc in one strike.
SAC bases were the front line of the Cold War. Crews that were on 15-minute alert. Their airplane was loaded with atomic munitions. They were parked in a chevron strip out near the active end of the runway. They could leave to go to the club and have something to eat, but they were in flying suits, and they still had to get their airplane off of the ground within 15 minutes.
Though official U.S. policy was to contain the Soviet threat, Lemay was convinced that SAC could win a war with Russia with few American casualties.
The view was that you had to have a set plan that could not be altered because this was going to be such a whiz-bang, rapid-fire war that you weren't going to be able to sit down and figure out what your next move was going to be. It really, in this view, had to be pre-programmed. It was get as many weapons off the ground as rapidly as possible and deliver them as sort of Federal Express as rapidly as possible on the target.
When the man who wanted World War III returns, a top-secret plan is developed that includes a first strike attack on the Soviets. It's a plan Lemay loves and begins to act on without informing the President of the United States.